For months, Eleanor Hart had been invisible. At least, that's how it felt when she walked into the job center and saw the way younger applicants were treated compared to her. She was 58 years old, shoulders still straight from years of teaching, hair streaked with gray she never bothered to hide. She wasn't ashamed of her age, but the world had a way of reminding her that it valued youth more than experience. The receptionist's polite smile barely reached her eyes. "Next," she called, and Eleanor stepped forward with the kind of measured grace that came from decades of classrooms and order. She filled out the paperwork, nodded at the endless requirements, and waited for someone to see more than her birthdate on the form. But that never happened. Employers glanced at her resume, saw the numbers, and quietly set it aside. Too old. Too slow. Too behind the times. At night, she sat alone in her small apartment, scrolling through online listings on a cracked tablet. The headlines shouted about the future, innovation, disruption, fresh perspectives. None of them had room for someone who had built a career shaping young minds. Overqualified was the polite rejection, but she knew what it meant. They thought her years of service were a liability instead of an asset. Her daughter, Amanda, tried to help. "Mom, you've still got so much to offer," she insisted, pushing brochures across the table. Fitness classes. Community projects. Senior enrichment programs. But Eleanor bristled. She didn't want to be shunted into something designed to keep the elderly busy until they faded away. She wanted purpose. She wanted to prove she wasn't done. The opportunity came by accident. A flyer pinned to a community board outside a cafe caught her eye one drizzly afternoon. The bold print read, "Volunteer Fire Department, New Recruits Wanted." She almost laughed out loud. At her age? But curiosity tugged at her. She read the fine print. No experience required. Commitment essential. Training provided. Her heart beat faster than it had in years. That night, she stared at the flyer spread across her kitchen table. Every rational thought screamed that she was too old, too fragile, too late. But another voice, the one she'd used to encourage generations of students, whispered, "Why not you?" The following Monday, she walked into the firehouse. It smelled of smoke and sweat, metal and fuel. Young men and women in their 20s and 30s filled the training hall, stretching, joking, radiating energy. Heads turned when she entered. A hush followed. One recruit whispered, not quietly enough, "Is she someone's mom? Did she get lost?" Laughter rippled. Eleanor held her ground. "I'm here to sign up," she said evenly. The chief, a grizzled veteran with arms like tree trunks, looked her over. His eyes narrowed, but there was no mockery in his gaze. Only curiosity. "Name?" he asked. "Eleanor Hart." He handed her a clipboard. "Fill this out. Training starts at 6 sharp." The others stared as she sat down, pen scratching across paper. She felt their eyes on her, sizing her up, dismissing her before she'd even begun. But she'd seen those looks before, on the faces of students who thought they knew everything until the test proved otherwise. She wasn't here to win their approval. She was here to prove something to herself. Training was brutal. The first day nearly broke her. Running drills in heavy gear, climbing ladders, dragging hoses across the yard until her arms trembled like leaves in a storm. Sweat soaked her shirt, stung her eyes, burned her lungs. The younger recruits lapped her easily, tossing sidelong grins at each other as they passed. She finished dead last, bent over with hands on her knees, heart hammering. Maybe you should sit this one out, one recruit said between chuckles. His name was Tyler, tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of young man who believed his strength made him untouchable. But Eleanor stood. Maybe you should worry less about me and more about your form, she replied calmly. Then she picked up the hose again. Day after day, she showed up. And day after day, the whispers followed. She's going to hurt herself. She'll never make it. What's the point? But there was something they didn't see. Every evening, when the others went home, Eleanor stayed. She practiced climbs until her hands blistered. She studied manuals, memorized procedures, drilled herself until muscle memory replaced hesitation. The chief noticed. He never said much, just watched from his office window as the older woman carried gear twice her weight, as she collapsed and got back up, as she turned quiet persistence into progress. He'd seen plenty of recruits burn bright and fade fast. But Eleanor's fire burned differently, steady, relentless. By the end of the first month, her times had improved. She wasn't first, not even close, but she wasn't last anymore. Tyler noticed. So did the others. The laughter softened into murmurs, then into silence. They started giving her space, watching to see if she'd actually last. The turning point came during a live drill. The recruits were split into teams, each tasked with navigating a smoke-filled training house, rescuing a weighted mannequin, and dragging it to safety. Tyler's team went first, storming in with confidence. They came out coughing, dragging the dummy but losing precious time in confusion and missteps. Eleanor's team went second. She was assigned to rear support, expected to follow orders and stay out of the way. But when her team faltered at a blocked doorway, panic rising, Eleanor stepped forward. Breathe slow. Stay low. Use your ears, not just your eyes, she commanded. Her voice was calm, steady, the same voice that had guided classrooms through chaos. And to everyone's surprise, her team listened. She found the alternate exit, led them through, and pulled the mannequin free in record time. When they stumbled into the daylight, coughing and blinking, the chief raised an eyebrow. Good work, he said, his tone giving nothing away. But Eleanor caught the flicker of respect in his eyes. Tyler scowled. Beginner's luck. But deep down, even he knew it wasn't. Eleanor went home that night, collapsed into bed, and cried. Not from exhaustion, but from something she hadn't felt in years, belonging. The next morning, she laced up her boots with fresh determination. She wasn't just surviving the program anymore. She was thriving. What no one expected was how quickly she'd get her chance to prove herself, not in a drill, not in a classroom, but in the kind of moment that separates stories you tell from legends you remember. It happened on a Thursday evening, just as the sun slipped below the rooftops and painted the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. The alarm shattered the firehouse calm with a piercing wail, and for a moment, everyone froze. Then chaos snapped into order. Recruits scrambled into gear, pulling on jackets, fastening helmets, grabbing oxygen tanks. Eleanor was among them, her fingers quick despite the adrenaline surging in her veins. Residential fire. Two-story house. Possible entrapment, the dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio. Eleanor's team piled into the truck. Tyler sat across from her, smirking as if to say, "Don't slow us down now." But when the truck rounded the corner and thick black smoke curled into the evening sky, the smirk faded. This wasn't training. This was real. The house was already an inferno. Flames licked at the second floor, windows shattered from the heat, the roof sagging dangerously. Neighbors shouted from the street, frantic voices overlapping. "There's someone inside. Upstairs. She can't get out." The chief barked orders. Team 1, establish water supply. Team 2, ventilation. Team 3, entry and search. Hart, you're with them. Eleanor adjusted her mask, the world shrinking to the hiss of her regulator and the pounding of her heartbeat. They pushed through the doorway, swallowed instantly by choking smoke. Visibility was near zero, the heat oppressive, pressing down like a physical weight. Stay low, she shouted, her voice amplified through the mask. The younger recruits hesitated, eyes wide behind fogging goggles. Panic hovered at the edge of their composure. Eleanor recognized it. She'd seen it in students before exams, in parents at emergency meetings, in anyone facing the unknown. Fear could cripple, or it could be harnessed. She crawled forward, sweeping the floor with her gloved hand, listening past the roar of fire for any sign of life. A faint sound reached her, the muffled cry of a child. She froze, orienting herself, then gestured sharply. This way. The team followed, coughing despite their masks, trust shifting toward the woman they'd once dismissed. Eleanor moved with certainty, guided by instinct honed from years of paying attention to details others overlooked. She found the staircase, flames clawing upward, wood groaning under stress. Tyler muttered, "We'll never make it." Eleanor shot him a look. "Then don't follow me." And she began to climb. Each step threatened to collapse, heat searing through her boots. Her lungs screamed, muscles shook, but she kept going. At the top, she dropped to her knees, crawling toward the cries. They led her to a bedroom door swollen shut from heat. Without hesitation, she drove her shoulder into it. Pain flared, but the door gave way. Inside, a little girl huddled in the corner, clutching a stuffed rabbit, eyes wide with terror. Eleanor's chest tightened, not from smoke, but from the raw sight of innocence trapped in hell. She scooped the child into her arms, murmuring through her mask, "I've got you. You're safe now." The house groaned, a sinister warning. Time was almost gone. Tyler appeared behind her, eyes wide at the sight of the child. "Move," he shouted, grabbing her arm. Together, they stumbled back to the stairs just as the ceiling began to cave. Debris crashed around them, sparks searing through gear, but Eleanor shielded the child with her body, absorbing the impact. They burst into daylight seconds later, collapsing onto the grass as firefighters doused the flames behind them. The crowd erupted in cheers, neighbors rushing forward, relief flooding their faces. The child clung to Eleanor, sobbing into her jacket. Paramedics swarmed, checking the girl, then Eleanor. She waved them off, removing her mask to gulp fresh air. Her face was streaked with soot, hair plastered with sweat, but her eyes were clear, steady. For the first time, the recruits saw her not as an old woman struggling to keep up, but as a warrior who had just done the impossible. The chief crouched beside her. "Good work, Hart. Damn good work." For once, Tyler had no words. That night, the firehouse buzzed with a different kind of energy. The story spread fast, how Eleanor Hart, the too-old recruit, had led the team through chaos and carried a child out of fire. Respect replaced ridicule. Whispers of doubt turned into murmurs of admiration. But Eleanor didn't bask in it. She cleaned her gear in silence, methodical as always, mind replaying the crack of collapsing wood, the heat of flames, the weight of the child's arms around her neck. She knew the battle wasn't over. One rescue didn't erase weeks of mockery or a lifetime of being underestimated. But it was a start. Days turned into weeks. Training continued, harsher than ever. Eleanor endured it all, the endless runs, the drills, the exhaustion that dug deep into her bones. She endured because now the younger recruits were watching differently. Some began to follow her example, staying late to practice, pushing harder, asking questions instead of sneers. Even Tyler's sharp tongue softened, though his pride fought every step. One evening, after a grueling ladder drill, he approached her. "Why do you keep going? You've already proved yourself." Eleanor wiped sweat from her brow, her voice calm. Because proving myself once doesn't mean I'm done. It means I've started. Tyler didn't answer, but the respect in his eyes spoke louder than words. Her reputation grew beyond the firehouse. Local newspapers ran the story, 58-year-old volunteer rescues child from blaze. Neighbors stopped her on the street to thank her. Parents pointed her out to their children as proof that age didn't define courage. But with recognition came new challenges. Some questioned the firehouse's decision to keep her. She's a liability, critics muttered at town meetings. What if she gets someone killed? The whispers weren't gone, they just changed tone. Eleanor bore them quietly, but they stung. The chief defended her fiercely. She's earned her place, he told the council. More than some half her age. His words silenced the room, but Eleanor knew doubt was like fire, it always found cracks to spread through. Her next test came sooner than expected. A factory fire on the edge of town, sprawling and unpredictable, with chemical hazards and collapsing steel beams. The department needed every hand, and Eleanor was right there, gear on, ready. Inside the inferno, the heat was worse than anything she'd faced. Visibility dropped to nothing, alarms screamed, and chaos threatened to tear the teams apart. But Eleanor's voice cut through it all, calm, commanding, unshakable. She directed her squad through blind hallways, kept panic at bay, and when a beam came crashing down, she shoved Tyler clear, taking the hit across her shoulder. Pain exploded, but she stayed standing, dragging him to safety. When the fire was finally contained, the chief called it one of the hardest nights in his career. And in the debriefing room, silence hung heavy until Tyler finally spoke. If she wasn't there, I wouldn't be here. His voice cracked, sincerity breaking through the bravado. From that night on, no one doubted Eleanor Hart again. But what shocked them most wasn't just her resilience or her courage. It was the revelation that came after, when whispers of her past surfaced. Because Eleanor hadn't simply been a teacher. She hadn't simply been someone looking for purpose late in life. She'd once walked a path few knew, carrying secrets that explained why, when the world thought she was too old, she was only just beginning. Rumors started quietly. Someone at the station asked where Eleanor had learned to stay calm under pressure, how she'd moved through that burning factory like she'd already memorized every corner. Tyler shrugged when reporters pressed him for details, but his silence only fueled speculation. It wasn't until a retired captain from another town stopped by the firehouse one afternoon that whispers turned into something more. I know you, he said, pointing at Eleanor as she scrubbed soot from her gloves. His voice carried the weight of recognition, not vague memory. Your Hart. You trained with emergency response units back in the 90s. They called you the Hawk, didn't they? The room went still. Recruits exchanged glances, eyes wide. Eleanor straightened, her expression unreadable. That was a long time ago, she said quietly. But the captain wasn't finished. You ran into places nobody else would. Earthquakes, collapsed buildings, riots, while the rest of us hesitated, you were already moving. You saved people who shouldn't have been saved. He shook his head, a faint smile tugging his lips. And you're still doing it. The revelation rippled through the crew. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces fit, the instincts, the composure, the unshakable will. Eleanor hadn't just stumbled into bravery at 58. She'd carried it all along, hidden beneath years of teaching and quiet life. That night, the recruits gathered around her in the kitchen, awkward at first, then full of questions. What had she done? Where had she served? How had she walked away? Eleanor listened, then chose her words carefully. I wasn't supposed to talk about it much, she began. But yes, I was part of special emergency deployments. We were sent where it was worst, disasters, chaos, places nobody else wanted to go. I saw things I'll never forget. And when it was over, I wanted normal life. Teaching gave me that. For a while. Why come back now? Tyler asked. Eleanor's gaze softened. Because I realized normal wasn't enough anymore. Not when I still had fight left in me. People assume age means weakness. But strength isn't about years. It's about choice. And I choose not to quit. Silence followed, not out of doubt but out of respect. The youngest recruit, barely 20, finally spoke. You make us believe we can last, too. Eleanor smiled faintly. That's the point. From then on, something shifted permanently. She was no longer the outsider, no longer the curiosity they mocked. She became the quiet anchor, the one whose presence steadied even the boldest hearts. Her experience turned into lessons, her scars into warnings, her perseverance into fuel for everyone else. Months passed. Fires came and went. Each one tested them, scarred them, but also bound them tighter. Eleanor never sought the spotlight, but the stories spread anyway. Neighbors spoke of her as if she were myth, parents told children that age was no barrier when courage called. And every time she suited up, she remembered the flyer that had started it all, the moment she refused to let the world tell her she was finished. The real shock, though, wasn't the child she saved, or the factory she endured, or even the secrets from her past. It was how her presence transformed everyone around her. Tyler, once arrogant, became thoughtful, deliberate, a leader who measured strength not by brawn but by steadiness. Younger recruits stopped competing against her and started learning from her. The chief, gruff and seasoned, admitted privately that she'd reminded him why he'd joined decades earlier. On the night of her official graduation, the firehouse was packed. Families cheered as certificates were handed out, applause ringing for each new firefighter. When Eleanor's name was called, the room rose to its feet. The ovation wasn't polite, it was thunderous, heartfelt, a recognition that she had done more than pass tests. She had rewritten expectations. Standing on the stage, Eleanor felt her throat tighten. She accepted the certificate, eyes sweeping across faces young and old. For once, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what she had accomplished, not just surviving training, not just proving doubters wrong, but showing everyone that strength doesn't vanish with age. Afterward, a reporter pushed through the crowd. Mrs. Hart, he asked breathlessly, what do you want people to take from your story? Eleanor thought for a long moment. Then she answered with the simplicity that had defined her journey. That you're never too old to matter. And that sometimes, the ones everyone overlooks are the ones who carry the fire we need most. The story ran the next morning across headlines, shared thousands of times. But for Eleanor, the real victory wasn't in the newspapers or the applause. It was in the quiet nods of her fellow firefighters, the respect that needed no words, and the knowledge that she had refused to fade quietly into the margins. Weeks later, during a routine call that turned dangerous, Tyler shouted across the smoke, "Follow Hart. She knows the way." No one questioned it. They moved as one, and they made it out alive. That was the legacy she'd carved, not in the flames, not in the danger, but in the trust she'd built. Eleanor Hart had been told she was too old. What happened next didn't just shock everyone, it changed them. Forever.